All right, this meeting is now being recorded. This is the 1619 Lingering Imprint on June 7th. And today we have a special presentation by Brian Biery, going to tell us about some local things that are going on here with a couple of the major churches here in the Pasadena area. And this is going to be a very interesting presentation. We're looking forward to it. I won't go through introducing all the guests. I'll let Brian go ahead with that. So Brian, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Dick. And thanks to the Pasadena Village and the 1619 Project, the Lingering Imprint, for providing a space for us to have this conversation. Um, I want to talk just a little bit about what the agenda will be today and how it will proceed, and then we'll do some introductions. And just as a starting point, what we've titled the description is Social Justice from the Outside and Ethical Transformation from Within. Um, and the reason for that is we're going to be talking about the relationship, the historical relationship between two Episcopalian churches here in Pasadena. And I think some villagers are familiar with All Saints Church, but some might not be as familiar with St. Barnabas Church. So we'll talk about the history, the intertwined history of the two of those, and then also contemplate what our role is. And Dick, this is you kind of inspired me with this part of it, but what is our role for deconstructing racism? What is our role for considering how we might build a moral, ethical, connected, caring community? And so it's both on an individual side, how can each one of us as unique people take responsibility and take a role, and then it's on an institutional side. So the institutions that we belong to, that we are a part of, that we're members of, how do we help guide them to be inclusive? How do we guide them to be thoughtful about their practices? And then when we hurt or injure other people, what do we do about healing those injuries? So the agenda today will be essentially, I want to welcome all of you, and it's good to see some of the villagers again, or the 1619ers, however you want to describe it again, because I've been in this room before. So welcome to everyone. We'll have introductions from our panelists, and I'll let them self-introduce. Then we'll have a panel discussion. The panel discussion, we have a series of questions that we will focus on. And what I'd like the listeners to do, or the observers to do, is to be thinking about questions that the conversation provokes, or even some observations. We will, rather than taking questions during the panel discussion, we'll wait until it has been completed. Then we have a significant amount of time set aside for dialogue with the audience. So we're hoping that we spark some curiosity and possibly even some shared experience. And then we'll have a few closing remarks and a call to action. And then we'll go on to the rest of our lives for today. So I want to thank my colleagues very much for first of all, for making the time, and secondly, to be here today, but more importantly, for prioritizing this issue in their lives. And one of the reasons why I'm helping to facilitate this conversation is because I am, and you'll learn more about this, but I'm a member of the Telling the Whole Story Committee at All Saints Church. So as an outside community member, I've been participating in the dialogue about this issue, this topic. And then also I have ties to All Saints Church for many, many years on several other, I would say, social justice and environmental justice projects. And then my mother has been a member of All Saints Church for 30 plus years. So that's how I'm tied to it. So I want to introduce each individually. So let's start with Stephen Williams. Stephen, thank you for being here. And if you could provide a brief introduction.
Absolutely. Hello and good morning to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I have been a audience on several of the Pasadena Village um, presentations with Brian, as I was telling Dick before we got on. So it's an honor to be here. Um, I am a member of All Saints Church. I've been a member of All Saints Church. My wife and I are members of All Saints Church. We've been there for 7 years. So, it's relatively new members. And originally, I was from the San Francisco Bay Area. My wife is from Oakland, and we moved down to the Southern California area in 1978. So we've been in Los Angeles and got into Pasadena in 1984. So we do have some roots here, and also I came from the entertainment industry, so that's where I spent my time in the entertainment industry, working on films and television and music. Um, but one of the things is that I'm a documentary filmmaker and just have a curiosity. I'd lived in Pasadena for quite some time, but never had really gotten into the roots of Pasadena. And so um, I started to dig into it, and especially in terms of All Saints' history. Um, and I discovered an awful lot of things. And thanks to Brian with his presentations and his historical background, it was very insightful. So look forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, Stephen, real quick before we leave, what are your roles at All Saints Church?
I have been in a lot of different things at All Saints Church, starting off with the congregational committee and the putting together of small groups. Also, I served on the vestry for 4 years there. I was a junior warden there, and currently I am a part of two of the Telling the Whole Story groups, one about the iconography in the church, and the second one about St. Barnabas and its history.
Great, and we'll go into more detail about what those groups are working, well, especially the St. Barnabas group is working on today. Thank you very much. Let's go to Marco White next.
Good morning, villagers. I am Marco White. I am one of only 3 people to ever be born in Pasadena. I say that facetiously because it feels that way sometimes, right? But I'm born and raised in Pasadena. I am a 3rd generation St. Barnabas Church member. My daughters are now the 4th generation. I am but St. Barnabas is a very unique community. Even though I'm a 3rd generation St. Barnaban, I can assure you I've never actually gone to church because it's actually a church family, right? So every time we get together, it is in fact like a reunion or going over grandma's house for chicken and waffles on Sunday afternoon. I'll explain more about that as we go. I'm here on this call to make you feel uncomfortable. So villagers, I suggest that your discomfort is required to make social change. And so that's what I hope to achieve in part this morning. So villagers, buckle up. It's going to be an interesting ride.
Great, thank you, Marco. Let's move to Walter Little next.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Walter Little from All Saints Church, Pasadena, currently serving in the capacity of the junior warden of the vestry. This is my 4th year on our vestry, and I'm also in the leadership of that. For those who are not familiar with the Episcopal terminology, vestry is our term for the board of directors, and the wardens, senior and junior warden, are the chairs of that board. I've been going to All Saints for a little bit more than 13 years at this point, been involved with a number of things along the way, particularly in the areas of congregational development. In fact, at one point, Brian's mom was on one of my usher teams. It's a community that's been a significant part of my life for this space. I lived in the area for 20 years, but I'm originally from Colorado. And so, as someone who's advocating for social justice and also in a leadership capacity at All Saints Church, I'm very interested in what we can do to further the conversation and the actions toward achieving beloved community.
Wonderful. Thank you, Walter. And my mother loves being on that team with you. So thanks for facilitating that. And our last panelist is Bill Gould.
Yeah, thanks. And good to see all of you. I think I've been to a couple of these meetings in the past too. My name is Bill Gould. I'm an immigrant to Pasadena, arrived here in the early 80s I first got here to go to college in this area, to Occidental College, and then I settled, I think, in my junior year into the Pasadena area and pretty much have lived in Pasadena, Altadena ever since. And then in terms of my roles at All Saints, I also am on the vestry with Walter. This is my third year. I've been at All Saints for 14 years. My wife and my kids, and we've been there for 14 years. The kids kind of grew up in the church. And then, also I've served on the Racial Justice Advisory Board for the church. This is an advisory board that advises the vestry on recommendations to sort of do better in the racial justice space. And lastly, I'm also on the telling the whole story committee, along with Steve and Brian. And so, that's there's a couple of committees that participate in that. But as you can see behind me, I'm William B. Gould the fifth. The first William Gould helped to found an Episcopal church in the Boston area. So very committed to the Black experience in the Episcopal churches. So anyway, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. So for everyone, why are we getting together? Why are we taking the time out of a Friday morning to talk about these issues? What do you want? What would you like to leave with? How would you like to feel at the end of this? What would you like to know? So we had a conversation about that, and here are a few areas as listeners that would be great if you could focus on. So the first one is understanding the truth. So there is this adage, of course, that history is written by the victors. So what that signifies is that oftentimes there are parts of our truth, of our reality, of our history that either go underreported or unreported. So this is a story that certainly my mother, we've invoked her name a couple of times. She had no idea. And, she's been an All Saints member for 30 years, but until I started investigating what was happening or what had happened, she wasn't aware of it. So understanding the truth is number one. Number two is this is a micro experience, or this is an experience, a local experience, but it reflects a macro scenario. It reflects the societal values and mores, not only, throughout Pasadena, but throughout California and throughout the United States. So this is a representation, a local representation of bias, discrimination, racism, if you will, that has connections to these other strands of our society or parts of our society. So be thinking about the broader experience, and especially because we have people who are beaming in from other places, how does it relate to your community? The next thought, the third one is, once we know this, what do we do with it? Once we have this information, how does it catalyze us to action? How does it affect how we look at the rest of the world? How does it, and then more locally about our own institutions? So you may be a parishioner at All Saints, or you may be a parishioner somewhere else, but what is your community, or what is your intimate network doing about this issue? And then what can you be doing on your own? One other concept that I want to raise, and we'll talk about quite a bit, is that especially since the civil rights movement, and this will be the last thought to kind of end on, and then we'll start our conversation, is that quite often, or generally, we as a society, and I say as white people being the people with power generally in society, is that quite often we ask people of color to solve racism. And so I want us all to be reflecting on, first of all, why do we do that? And secondly, how do we readjust so that we don't place both the burden and the responsibility of creating a racially just society on the people who have suffered the most. So those are some thoughts to be percolating in your mind as we're discussing. And so I want to jump into the conversation right now. And
let me just put a tag here, Brian, before you do, okay? Is that I needed to add that I'm also on the racial justice ministry at the church, and my wife, Clara, is she's co-chairperson, excuse me, of that group. So we'll probably touch bases with that a little bit later also.
Sounds good. Thank you, Stephen. So as a level setting, let's start with the beginning historically. So let's talk a little bit about St. Barnabas Church. When was it founded? By whom? What were the historical, what was going on in Pasadena at that time? How did the church evolve? And then we'll segue into what its relationship is or was at that time with All Saints Church. So Marco, do you want to start us off with some basic fundamentals about where and when St. Barnabas founded and some of the folks who were involved in that process?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. So St. Barnabas' story is really the American story, right? It's American history that has been whitewashed, that has not been told, that has been ignored. It goes to the point that Brian made earlier, and that was that there may be villagers, there are villagers on this call, for example, who are very familiar with All Saints, but maybe not so much so with St. Barnabas. And I suppose we have to ask ourselves why. Because St. Barnabas is in fact 100 years old, just about the same age as All Saints, right? It is very much an institution in this city, just as much as All Saints. St. Barnabas was founded in the context of St. Barnabas is, again, the American history story that after the Emancipation Proclamation and then Juneteenth, right? Which we are celebrating with All Saints, by the way. We'll go into that a little bit more later. But that all, of course, resulted in a great migration from the South for formerly enslaved persons to looking for greater freedoms and justice and communities of love in the North and the West, only to be confronted with Jim Crow, white Christian hypocrisy in the form of racism, redlining, all of those realities of the early 1900s, and specifically the migrants from the South who made their way, the formerly enslaved persons who made their way to Pasadena in the early 1900s, was confronted with white Christian hypocrisy in the form of racism from All Saints. and not allowed to fellowship or not allowed to worship at All Saints. They then formed their own worship services in their own homes throughout Pasadena, literally in living rooms and in kitchens and so forth, for about 10 years, right? Can you imagine holding church in your kitchen for 10 years? I think that's a significant sign of dedication and commitment to love. But
Marco,
through that, you go ahead.
Can you tell the part of the city where folks were doing that? Where some of those homes were?
Yeah, spot on. And so that was, as is still the case today, or remnants of what happened in the early 1900s. Northwest Pasadena was the only area in Pasadena where people of color could live, and so they eventually, these 8 founding matriarchs of St. Barnabas, they eventually were recognized as a mission by the regional church that we call the diocese, right? And were formally recognized in 1923. And from that point on, they continued to be faithful worshipers. They continued to fight for justice and for civil rights, etc., up until this very day, where we find ourselves still in the shadows of having no relationship, essentially, with between the two institutions. But St. Barnabas continues to be very much of an institutional center of Northwest Pasadena, particularly in the African American community. But St. Barnabas has always, actually, very much like many of the HBCUs and others, St. Barnabas has always been rather diverse and reflective of the community at large, right? So I want to underscore that.
Yeah, and talking about location a little bit, my understanding is that those original 1923, those original parishioners were, there was another part of town where people of color could live, and it's in the old Pasadena area where all of us know where the 710 freeway stub is, and underneath there was Vernon Avenue. Were there some parishioners who came from that area, like around Del Mar, and then when were they moved up into Northwest?
Sure. Well, as is the case with, throughout our history, people of color have been displaced and displaced and displaced, right? And so, so certainly the developments and the covenants that changed over time in Pasadena, allowing people to live in certain areas, they, pushed people of African American descent, or of African descent, pushed them further and further northwest. And then, of course, the 210 freeway displaced the Black Wall Street in Pasadena, right? So it's a typical story, right? But I think the interesting part is it's not about Oklahoma or Tulsa. It's not about Florida. It's about Pasadena. And so Brian's point earlier is that this is the micro of the macro. The macro is, again, the same founders and members of early 1900s All Saints were the same folks that founded the Valley Hunt Club, Westridge School for Girls, the Tournament of Roses. All of these organizations were exclusively white, and the ripple effect of those early policies continue today, which is what this conversation really ultimately is all about.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about and I can't see the faces of the villagers, but maybe except for Sharon. But maybe as a if you can use your reactions or a thumbs up or something, want to make this a little more interactive. How many of you know where St. Barnabas Church is located? Sharon, thank you so much. Okay, Selena knows. Anybody else? So it looks like a lot of people, like maybe Will and Dick, don't know where it is. So let's talk about that, because that's how, this is another part of not only studying history but studying our present. Is people drive by it on Fair Oaks is a busy street. I don't know, 15,000 cars a day, 20,000 cars a day, something like that. I bet anybody who's driven around town has driven past St. Barnabas and they didn't even know it was there. So let's kind of do two things. Let's talk about where it's located, but then also why it was built there, and then who built it. So maybe Walter, do you want to tackle part of that or any of that, or Stephen or Bill?
Sure. So as you all may have read in the article that was sent out prior to this, the St. Barnabas building was built using funding from some of the families at All Saints Church at that time. In particular, the Dobbins family providing the land, and the Fleming family providing the construction funding. So I mean, from a logistics point of view, that's how I understand that happened. Recognizing that All Saints had several choices that they could have made at that time, one of which being inviting the community to come worship at All Saints. And so I can't speak for how the decision that it went the way that it did happened at that time, other than to say that to recognize that All Saints had options at that time for how they wanted to engage, and also, and you all were talking about the micro and the macro. And I'm wondering if there's a term for in between those two, because I think that there's a larger Los Angeles narrative that leads to that moment, right? That we can perhaps get into later on this call. But yes, it was a handful of families at All Saints that provided the financial capital for St. Barnabas to be built in Northwest Pasadena.
Yeah, it's on Fair Oaks, just above Mountain and below Hammond. For those of you who, it's across the street from Robinson Park and next door to Jackie Robinson Center. For those of you who don't know where it is, I think this might be an obvious question, but I really think we should state it. And maybe Stephen wants to take this on, being a member of the or former member of the vestry, and then part of the racial justice movement at All Saints, is why wouldn't All Saints at that time say, let's just this is a parish of ours, these are Episcopalians, they're good Episcopalians, we're providing them with support through the diocese. Why wouldn't they allow them to come worship at the high church next to City Hall? So Stephen, you want to, I saw you raise your hand.
I did, and I have something to really add to the other thing, but really on these kind of things, I really want to defer to Marco, because I cannot interpret, for someone who's lived 4 generations in this space, and me so little. I'm only academic. It's only from what I've read and what I've absorbed from it. So I just wanted to make that caveat on that. But I do want to add, because the issue that we're talking about is intent, right? Actions are really centered around intent, whether they be subtle, subconscious, or whatever. And you have to ask the question, is that why would some of the white parishioners at All Saints donate land and money at someplace outside of their church for an African-American community worship. And obviously the elephant in the room is because they did not want them to be in the same place that they were. And that because of the equity gap in them having resources and money, they would sacrifice that money and the resources in order to move them 1 mile away from their particular church. So we can really talk about that. I really wanted to add something, which is, there is a book that I'm going to reference here for people. It is called Hearts on Fire, okay? Hearts on Fire is a book about the years of George Regas, who was one of the rectors at All Saints Church. There's a gentleman who is a minister, as a matter of fact, his name is Bill Doulos, Bill Lane Doulos, who wrote this book about George Regas's time as a rector at All Saints Church. And I'm bringing this up, and it's not going to take a long time, but when we talk about intent and also the way that people think about it, and they think their actions are harmless, right? But in reality, they're not. And here in this book, and it's on page 13 in Bill's book, and he's talking about All Saints at the time in their early life. There may have been one Negro family or two Negro women members of the congregation at that time. Two ladies who served as housekeepers and cooks for more prominent members of the parish. The Negro lady sat in the balcony. St. Barnabas Parish has been created to serve few Negro Anglicans in Pasadena. And the general feeling at the time was that St. Barnabas was the appropriate place for such folks, most of whom were domestic workers. The establishment of such a parish was seen to be compassionate and not racist or malicious. Now, this is in Bill's words he's writing. When a Negro chauffeur arrived with his white employer on Sunday morning at All Saints, an usher turned him away, reportedly, and the white family left also, but there was little fuss or controversy. The newcomer white person simply didn't understand Pasadena community's norms and the sense of propriety of the transplanted Church of England. So that book is available if you want to. And I think this is really one of the things that's really interesting because of when we talk about, and I'm guilty of it too, being in a place and not knowing the history, not really even being inquisitive or curious about finding the history is really detrimental when it really comes down to it. And I think the shock of the St. Barnabas story and around their 100th anniversary, I think woke up a lot of people and stuff. So
Thank you for sharing that that book and then the quote from the book. I think that's absolutely exactly where we want to focus this conversation. So to move us to today, so we know now what happened 100 years ago and why it happened. I think you clearly stated why it happened. So let's move to today. Why is the church working on reconciliation, working on reflection, working on analysis at this moment? What was the catalyst? And maybe I'll start with Bill and then move to Walter and Stephen if you want to add anything. Why now? And the other question is, why hadn't it been discussed before?
Well, yeah, I appreciate that question. Stephen kind of alluded to it. I think it was a wonderful celebration that St. Barnabas had that got, a lot of for their 100th reunion. And sadly, many folks at All Saints knew nothing about, the history, knew nothing about the 100-year celebration. So I think, in part, to be honest, I feel like, All Saints was sort of shamed into, action, but sadly, I'm part of the Racial Justice Advisory Board. So about 6 years ago, that board brought forth a recommendation to the vestry, which the vestry passed, which was to look into and create an action plan to sort of start some sort of remedy process, and some sort of 6 years ago. And unfortunately, nothing has happened with that recommendation about 6 years ago. And so I think as a church member who's has African descent, I think it is troubling that of some of our church's history and some of our church's inaction, in the space. But at the Stephen, and I think you alluded to, Brian, at the outset, I don't know that that's the fault of it's definitely not the fault, in my book, of the Black parishioners at All Saints. However, I think as a church, we're all a part of that. For those of us here with All Saints, I think it's important for us to, make sure that we do create some sort of action plan, and we do listen, because this is in partnership with St. Barnabas to sort of, we can't just sort of impose all of our ideas on this to St. Barnabas, but some of it is about our healing ourselves and our getting our game together, at All Saints. And there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do around racial justice at All Saints, as there are, at many Episcopal churches across the country and many churches in general. So, yeah, I mean, I think definitely we were, a lot of media attention, your article, the LA Times article, other articles, on this subject, and sort of the media coverage, I think, helped to maybe spurn some where we are today of hopefully, making some good action steps in the space. And, like Marco said, we are doing a Juneteenth activity coming up in a couple of weeks to really, hopefully really kick off a much better relationship looking forward. But it's not sort of a culmination activity. It's a beginning activity that we're trying to envision. So anyway, yeah, somebody's saying that they would love, Brunel is saying she would love to have the LA Times article. And I know Marco.
We've shared all the articles that are referenced with Dick. So Dick, when you have a chance, please forward them on to the group. And Bill, let's I want to bring Walter in and just say, from just thinking about our previous discussion and then what we've talked about today so far, why don't you think this issue was raised previously? What has been going on within the church? And actually, let me frame it a little bit more. All Saints Church is an exemplar, for the Pasadena community and actually Los Angeles overall. It's been a leader in LGBTQ rights. It's been a leader in many other battles on civil rights. It's been a part of social justice movements for many years. Why start this conversation now, and why didn't it happen before?
Yeah, so one thing I want to just clarify here is that this is not something that was recently brought to All Saints Church's attention. This is something that people have been speaking out about in various ways for many years. When I first started coming to All Saints around 2011, maybe within a year after I started attending here, the Reverend Stephanie Spellers, who's part of our national church organization, published a book at the time called Radical Welcome. And All Saints is mentioned in that book. This is from 2012, and I'll just give you a quick quote from that. One of the largest, most visible progressive Episcopal churches in the country, All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, California, hasn't traveled an easy road toward radical welcome. On the surface, it looks simple. During the Vietnam War, All Saints served as a center for the faith-based peace movement. Throughout the more recent gay and lesbian liberation struggle, they had become a powerful voice, urging the church to move from fear to hope. Many congregations look to them for direction and on how to, my computer is not scrolling properly, on how to step out on social issues while growing in numbers and financial health. What they could never face was the race divide. So that is a quote from a book, 12 years ago, pointing this out, and there were people before. So I think that from my, so I can't speak for how All Saints was prior to my experiencing it, but certainly it hasn't been until maybe the last 7 or 8 years that I have seen serious discussion about the root causes of white supremacy culture being talked about in a serious way at All Saints. And Bill and Steve have referenced some of the initiatives that have happened since I have participated in some of the telling the whole story. I think that's a really powerful way to frame this work. Is that for us to write a new story together, we have to collectively share the whole story of what has happened up to this point. And that's not to say that All Saints hasn't been involved in various progressive activities. Certainly they have. But what I would say is that many of the ministries and initiatives that over the decades that have intersected with racial justice really were more about combating problems that white supremacy created, if that makes sense. That's my thoughts on it. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work toward a world in which this work isn't needed anymore. So and to that end, really looking forward to what we're doing this month with St. Barnabas.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's really helpful. Kind of an overview, and then also some thoughts about the context in which we're in. So just to kind of summarize, there's a certain amount of, in society, recognition, of course, that there was an issue in the past. So there's a recognition of the history, then there's a dealing with that or a confronting it, and then there's taking action. So it's a process. So what I'm hearing is All Saints is in the middle of a process. So Bill had mentioned this, and I want to toss this to actually all three of you, and then we'll get Marco's response. So what does, so Stephen, Bill, and Walter, what does listening mean? What does that?
Hey, Brian, if I can just interject before you ask that question, just to piggyback off of Walter's point, the pink elephant in the room, and this is the uncomfortable part, right? The pink elephant in the room is if there are forces, individuals within All Saints that continue to be, that are still resistant to racial justice vis-a-vis St. Barnabas, we should name it.
Yeah. And that's actually, again, thinking about the broader society, that's true. And I think we saw that on January 6th, and there are many, we saw that in Ferguson. And so there are strands and strains of racism that persist today in many parts of our society. So yes,
but respectfully, Brian, I might take it back to what Marco is saying, is that Well, that's all true. I think that there is definitely a moment to name it in this local context with these local institutions.
Yeah, no, I was just giving a comparison on a societal. So absolutely, if you would like
Brian,
to mention it
Brian,
locally, that would be great.
but Brian, and also it's not just strains and segments of the society, right? That our brothers here, Walter, Bill, and Stephen, I'm an advocate for them, right? Because they are putting up a good fight. And the point is that they have to fight. They have to fight within their own church, right? Which is why their passion is exactly like mine. Mine's from the outside. That's the subtitle of this interaction, right? Mine's from the outside, theirs is from the in. But don't underestimate the forces within All Saints that they are fighting against, which is why nothing has happened for 100 years, which is why they, as Walter said, years ago, that conversations were being had. Bill has acknowledged that. Stephen has acknowledged that this is a long process, a fight for them, for racial justice, right? So I don't want, so we can't whitewash it in a way to say, well, society, there's always, MAGA folks or whoever they might be, right? That there's always a subset of our society that feels this way. No, evidently, there's a rather significant power base within All Saints that ain't for this. And that's naming it, I think.
Great. What that requires then, and this is what happens in all social justice movements, it requires courage, and it requires energy, and it requires organizing. And for people to fight against those institutional and individual barriers or movements or perspectives within the context of a particular organization. So what I would say is that Walter, Stephen, and Bill are courageous individuals. They are committed, and they're taking a lot of their time and energy, and I know this for a fact, to be organized so that they can fight against the opposition, if you will, that you're talking about, Marco. So I'd love to have, I'm happy to dive deeper into All Saints if you all want, but I'd like to hear, and we'll start with Stephen. I'd like to hear from Stephen, Walter, and Bill to maybe talk about what are the forces that you're contending with that prevent you from making the progress that you want to make. So Stephen?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think first we need to recognize that the thing that we are experiencing in this country and the division that we exist in this country today, as we lead into this really critical election that's coming up, that exists everywhere, and it exists within All Saints itself. Not everybody. It is a church. The church is a pass, saying that ultimately that we all are a part of the beloved community, and we all basically look at it the same. It's really, Marco has a statement. It's called St. Barnabas love, and that's how they move towards everything. We have just divisions. Not everybody sees the world in the same way. However, in the big institutions, whether this be at All Saints, and we're going to leave it because All Saints is our key that we're talking about, but the institutions in Pasadena themselves have held on to their ability to protect their superiority in terms of white supremacy. Whether you could look throughout Pasadena and look at the large corporations. You could look at the way the city was developed. You could look at, the legal institutions, Han and Han, and I'm quoting because of complicity in terms of making sure that things did not move along. But at All Saints itself, we have a long legacy of rectors that have come through the church and have not or have been uncomfortable with moving into this issue, right? So what we have, these things fall on African Americans and the Black congregations to basically point out the inequities and to push people in the direction to do that. This is something that's historically, you find out that's all the time. And of course, the African Americans, when they do that, get labeled as the rabble-rousers, as the disruptors, as all those sort of things, because as Marco said again, it's an uncomfortable conversation. It is something that people do not want to feel that way because they don't know how to have that conversation. So even when it's presented to say, let's have that conversation, there's not a lot of participation in those things at all. And that's where it becomes really difficult. So to say that we pushed a button and we're moving forward, it's because of, I think, the collective work of the Racial Justice Ministry and advisory boards and our allies, because there are allies there that have helped us, like Sisyphus, the Greek myth, right? That ball that's on the back of your thing and you're trying to take it up a hill and it falls and you move back and you try to get it back up. That's where that really is. You know what I mean? It's a challenge.
And then I would say,
Walter. Go ahead, Walter.
Yeah, and I would just say that, for sure, white fragility is a factor in this work, for sure. Let's name that. Where we need to be is where we are addressing that in a way that invites people to work on that and to join us in this work, and not take their toys and go elsewhere, right? I think that's part of the challenge, and I think that formation is a big part of this work, right? And if I'm talking about formation, what are we forming? What are we forming? And there's this book I will commend to you all. I don't know if my camera is going to show it up backwards or not. It's Black and Episcopalian by Gail Fisher Stewart. It's a book that we have had a couple of book groups on at All Saints. It's been an extremely valuable book for me in working on this path myself. And Gail brings up that question: what are we forming? In fact, she very specifically asked, "What are we forming? Are we forming disciples of Jesus or white clones?" Right. So that's something that we need to incorporate into how we work with the congregation again on inviting them to do this work with us.
So to carry on with that thought, and Bill, I'll toss it to you, is what are we forming? What is it that we would like to see happen is another related question. Through this action, what would the desired outcome be? So Bill?
Well, so, I definitely think that action is really important. I think, we've, as a church, collectively sat on this for 100 years. And I feel like, it's critical to acknowledge, for us, in our own 100th celebration. I think Stephen has been fantastic about this, to really call out that we need to name this in our own 100th celebration, this as a place in our 100th celebration, that, that people know sort of the good and the ugly, in All Saints history. And I think, I think all of this lays at leadership at the vestry and at the parish, itself. I think each segment has some accountability. I'm frustrated with my own involvement, on the vestry. I've been trying to get the vestry to come up with a racial, kind of a racial justice contracting policy. And I've been after them, saying no, voting no on like contracts, because I said we got to have a policy where we, I feel like a lot of times it goes on deaf ears. It's really frustrating as a vestry member to not have maybe like-minded folks who are with you in the struggle, but it's really nice to know that somebody like Walter, who is a comrade, and what we need to do is we need to nurture other, white comrades in this space to help to maybe convince some of the folks who need a lot of education and a lot of work to be done. There isn't, I think, within our church, we have, just like, all Black communities, we have a very diverse Black community. There's not one thought. A lot of times we disagree on different actions, but I think that that's healthy to have those kinds of discussions. But what I think sometimes at All Saints is unhealthy, and I think we need to really work on, is we need to have sort of courageous conversations where we're not just doing, although I think it's wonderful to do a book reading, but the next step is, hey, what are we going to do about these things? What action steps are we going to take? And so, I do view the Juneteenth, like I said, our event in a couple of weeks as a great beginning, but I'm really hoping we don't just stop there, like it's, sort of a kissing the baby kind of opportunity where somebody kisses a baby and then, they're done with that subject. So I'm hoping that we stick with it and it's not a one and done kind of thing for us. So anyway, those are just a few thoughts. I definitely think some of it comes with All Saints and some of it comes with building relationship. And then some of it should come with tangible, concrete actions. We've been tossing around some ideas, that I think Marco has brought forth some fabulous ideas that I think really need to be fully digested by All Saints and acted upon, and maybe, we have a few ideas to add to that mix, but I think we do need to act, and we do need to move this forward, like, post haste.
Thank you for that, Bill.
Marco had mentioned in a prior conversation or email that our collaboration on Juneteenth represents a cornerstone that's shared between these two institutions, right? So on the 16th, we're bringing that cornerstone together. We're bringing that into being. What happens after that is up to us. Does this become, the start of something, bigger, or is it going to be a brick laying in a yard forgotten about? By the way, I'm framing it, my preference, right, is we're gonna build something with it. But absolutely, this is representing a start of a new chapter with All Saints and St. Barnabas.
Yeah, we're moving toward a time when we want to bring the audience in to ask some questions or make some comments. But before we do that, Stephen, I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, I want to just talk about, because we haven't talked about the cost of white supremacy and the cost to All Saints of what happened with St. Barnabas. It was a tremendous loss. It was a loss from All Saints' standpoint. They suffered because by turning away a vibrant African-American community, that shut out the culture to be shared within its own walls. And to this day, we're still struggling with that. All Saints doors were not open really for African Americans until after the 1954 Plessy versus Ferguson got overturned. And slowly did they allow that. In 1962, 63, they had very few African American members. So, and this really was reflective of the Episcopal Church all the way around. But my heart is really feels that we were denied as new members when we came to All Saints, something that would have been much more established because of what St. Barnabas, if they had been a part of that, right? And because you can feel that when you walk into the door at St. Barnabas right now, the one thing that they built a family, as Marco said, and I think that's really the loss, the cost of these kind of things that happen.
Thank you for adding that. Before we open it up for comments, Marco, we had a conversation about the compounding interest concept. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that based on Stephen's observation about the cost of white supremacy, of racism, of segregation, etc. Go ahead and turn on your, or
can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Yeah. So thank you for that lead in. So before I touch on that the notion of moral debt that is subject to compound interest, I wanted to put a layer on top of the social realities that we have been discussing by highlighting that All Saints is a place of worship. So there is a spiritual and a moral layer to it as well, right? So it's not just IBM doesn't hire black folks, or a private company doesn't hire black folks, or a private school doesn't admit black folks. This again, white Christian hypocrisy is all the difference in the world, right? And so I think all of us that have experienced any number of sermons in any church, particularly a Christian church, but actually in all of the major religions, the most common theme of a sermon is what? Love thy neighbor. Boom. So there's a whole nother layer of specific hypocrisy that is on top of the social injustice, right? So let that marinate.
And I always thought in Sunday school that it was love thy neighbor, no matter what they looked like, no matter who they were. It was love everyone. So right. Continue.
The Bible certainly does not have an unless after that.
That's right. Amen. So let that marinate. To address your point, the social justice events create moral and ethical debt. Obviously, right? You harm someone, there is a debt on top of doing them wrong and then making them whole. There is also that spiritual component as well. But when you then compound the initial sin or the initial event by ignoring it, by not allowing yourself to be held accountable, by not even acknowledging it, then every day that goes by, you do more harm. That's just human nature. That's logic, right? Yep. And so the apology, the interesting thing is the apology the year after my matriarch mother, founders of my church, the apology the day after they were not allowed to worship at All Saints is a different apology that is owed today. It's exponentially more, because not only is there an apology that is owed for the original sin and offense, but there's an apology owed for every day that
it continues
for 101 years, right?
Yeah.
And to be more personal, there are more than 500 St. Barnabas Church members that have passed away in the last 101 years who didn't get a chance, didn't receive the justice that they deserved.
Yeah, didn't hear the apology.
Didn't hear the apology. And guess what? There's been 15 people in my church family, who have passed in the last 8 years since the current rector has been there.
Yeah.
So that's something to, again, personal accountability through this. I am a big personal accountability individual on top of all of the concerns that we have expressed, I want to underscore that, again, George Regas led All Saints against arguably a congregation that was not, certainly not totally in support of, at that point, it was called gay and lesbian rights, right? He personally went against his own congregation and led because it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
So where is the leadership today?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've evoked, I think, numerous questions, thoughts, perspectives within, not all, between all of us, because I have a few more questions now too. But in the spirit of including our audience members in this discussion, I'd like to open it up. And what I'd like to ask, and I know in these previously, Sharon, Dick, Lucinda, Will have all had questions. I'd like if you could, because we do have limited time, if you could, if you want to make an observation or a question, if you could keep it relatively brief. But I think for all of us to expand our thinking, questions would be really helpful right now from your perspective. So how are you feeling? What are you thinking? What has this conversation brought up in you? And feel free to either wave your hand or use the digital version of hand raising. Who would like to go first? What has this conversation caused you to reflect on personally? Okay, let's start with Brunel. And Brunel, I saw you were quite active in the chat as well. So thank you for all those contributions.
Oh, thank you for having this conversation. And pardon me, I'm kind of out of breath. I'm taking my morning walk. So I'm sorry about walking and sharing. I think I'm just going to pause here so that I'm not breathing so heavily. This conversation is bringing up a lot for me right now. I'm not sure how much this is my first time learning about this group, and so I'm not familiar in terms of representing the villagers, but I would love to stay connected. But I've been at All Saints, I want to say 8 years now. I was there the last year that Ed Bacon, his year of retirement, right before he announced his retirement, and have been there since Reverend Kimman has been the rector. And a few observations I've had as an African-American parishioner is I've had to seek safety for my own cultural self by primarily going to 7:30 service. One, because the music doesn't resonate for me, and that's fine. I can find ways to be able to hear gospel music and music that spiritually is uplifting to me other places. But there's also this sense of superiority around that has been overtly stated at the church, that the music that is sung at All Saints is the holiest music. And that's obviously hurtful. And also, I go to the 7:30 service. I have been going to the 7:30 service most of my time now because the iconography is so painful. I know Brother Steve alluded to that in the work. I'm so grateful for the work that he's been doing on that in the main sanctuary. It's hard to see it. And since I've been there, I have been able to express my concerns, my hurt, my injuries around racial harms that have happened to both Reverend Kinman and Reverend Sally Howard. And since Reverend Mark Chase has been there, to Chase. And it has been received. And what I have found is, although they have been able to hear it and even support, like they, in 20, I know you said be brief, but in January 2020, I was invited by Reverend Sally and Reverend Mike to give a 3-day trauma training on the Ma'afa. I'm a clinical psychologist, so my specialization is on racial harm and trauma. And we had a nice turnout of like maybe 30 people. And we had done the October before that a trauma training that was a half-day training about how to get back into the community. And so we were putting some stuff into action, but then the pandemic happened. And so I want to say there have been some things where there's just been a remnant of some people who have said, oh yeah, we need to deal with the Ma'afa. The Ma'afa is a Kiswahili word that means great disaster and destruction beyond human comprehension and convention, referring to the forced kidnapping and enslavement of African descendant people. But what I'm seeing now, on the heels of the concert being canceled by Wei Chang and some African American parishioners saying, how can this choir sing a concert, a spring concert, offer a spring concert on songs of freedom when All Saints Church has not provided freedom for people of African descent? And it has done and continues to do the opposite. And so it's almost just like the MAGA movement now. People are coming out the woodworks with overtly racist statements, like overtly racist, hostile statements that many of them don't even know are racist and hostile and injurious. Some do and some don't care. One woman told my partner yesterday, she said, why y'all could just not come to the concert, and you're just not even courageous to not talk to the choir about it. If 6 or 7, 8 people, just don't come. And she kept referring to Black people as you people, you people, you people. And that sentiment of you people, that sentiment of dehumanization, the sentiment of not wanting to listen to our story, it's hurtful. I'm even at the point now, I'm just not sure if I can remain a member. And that's what I'm wrestling with right now, because as much hope that I have had in Reverend Mike being able to see and listen and hold space for things that I've shared with him that have been challenging about All Saints Church, I'm not sure if the church as a whole is ready to really do the work of unrooting anti-Blackness. I'm not sure if they're even willing to do that work. I pray so, but I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brunel, for your observations and comments. Before we go to Will, any thoughts or responses from our panelists?
No, I appreciate Brunel and her honesty, and I think it is one of those things that just reinforces the fact of what is really rooted in these places, and the contradiction and hypocrisy, as Marco has said, in terms of it's a religious, spiritual institution where we're supposed to be safe, where we're supposed to come and receive soothing, balm in Gilead, to refresh us to go out into the world. But if we can't see ourselves in those places, right? And I think this is one of the things that goes back to St. Barnabas. By refusing St. Barnabas to be a part of that church, they did not want to see African Americans represented in that place. And as you can look into the church and its physical space, everything on the walls and around it and everything else does not represent a diverse group of people. So as the church has grown, it's become more uncomfortable with the majority of the race, and there's a resistance because they feel it's being taken away from them, and it's turning into something that they literally have said, are they turning this into a Black church?
Yeah.
Yeah. Marco?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. Thank you, my sister, for sharing your truth. Built within, arguably within the walls of All Saints is the fact that Black and brown workers were good enough to build the building, but not good enough to worship there. And the ripple effect, the generational and systemic effect of that culture continues today, I would argue, and one evidence of that is, I'm not sure that we all know that, but Pasadena is actually a majority minority city today. 51% of Pasadena are people of color. And I say that because All Saint does not reflect our community. And so you have to wonder why. I think we know why, because of the ripple effect of that culture from 100 years ago, and the active participation of some of those, of some of the parishioners there that hold those same or similar feelings. So again, I'm glad in this moment we are naming it for what it is, right? That not all St. Barnabas, or rather not all Saints people are in this category. I mean, and I have high regard for All Saints, believe it or not, I do. But I will also say that we as Christians and as people, just as human beings, we deserve to be happy. We deserve to worship in locations and in churches where we are celebrated, not just tolerated. So that, I think, is something that we all have to wrestle with,
right,
as we go through this reconciliation process.
Yeah, so much of what Brunel said was, so powerful. One of the key questions she asked is the church really ready for change? And I want that to sit with everyone as we move on to Will. Will, what's your question or observation?
Okay, well, many things come up, but to keep it brief, I want to put out two concepts and then briefly go something about what they relate to this immediate micro situation, which I think is this is where the action is. What happens at All Saints, St. Barnabas, Pasadena? For people who don't know, I'm not in Pasadena. I'm in Portland, Oregon, but I used to live in Pasadena. I used to live in Sierra Madre. But the two concepts I want to deal with, or have you a panel deal with, one is exclusive versus inclusive, and the second is truth and reconciliation. So the exclusive versus inclusive, I was raised Episcopalian, born Episcopalian. When I went into the Army, one of my relatives said, you have to put an E for Episcopal on your dog tags instead of P for Protestant, because you might get a Baptist praying over you when you're in trouble. More immediately, I went to Ascension Parochial School in Sierra Madre. Ascension still is there as a high church-looking little village church. In fact, our football team used to play All Saints, and we had a cheer. Arizona grapefruit, California grapefruit, Arizona cactus. We play All Saints just for the practice. So I am a child of the Episcopal Church, and I am very conscious of how the Episcopal Church was a bastion of exclusiveness. Everybody who is anybody. We were the upper class. The Presbyterians were kind of pretenders, but Episcopal were definitely the exclusive group. And that tradition still holds in bones of, I think, the denomination, and probably at All Saints. It was the church. It was the place where you were anybody who was anybody, you were at All Saints. That is exclusive. And that, I think, was the predominant ethos of America up through the 60s, or really World War II, when we fought against the Nazis with their racial injustice. But it's still, up until the 60s, was dominant. And it's still there today, not just for the political Republicans trying to undermine the black devotion of Democrats, but because we in our bones, as individuals with a European-dominated culture, have it. So we are now in a time when inclusion is coming, partly because, as you say, Pasadena, which was a very nice, exclusive town when I was around, is majority-minority. It's time to let me back up. Majority, global majority. Minority in this country, but the global majority is more represented than it was in the past. The second one, truth and reconciliation. Where does reconciliation play in the changes needed in All Saints, connecting with St. Barnabas and Pasadena in general? I'd like to know what the panelists think about truth and reconciliation as a concept.
Sure.
Thank you, Will.
I can start.
Walter, why don't you start?
So a couple of thoughts on your comments, Will. That inclusion word is a little bit tricky because is that where it stops, right? I don't think so, right? And in All Saints' work in the LGBTQ space, there was formed a group that became a national church initiative on that called Beyond Inclusion, right? And so we share as one of our core values at All Saints is radical inclusion, and there have been discussions recently about how can we frame that better. Inclusion isn't the goal. Celebration of all of the people in the community is the goal. Like Marco was saying. So there's that, and the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. So it's really a matter of whether All Saints wants to be on the train or not. And then as far as the reconciliation part, I think that there's a theological framework for reconciliation, and that's the process that I hope will continue to try and work toward. That has a lot of listening and honesty.
Thank you, Walter. We're coming to a point where we're getting close to the end of our time. And what I'd like to do is allow each of the panelists to make a closing statement. And especially, why don't we think of it in light of Will's last point and what Walter was talking about is what does the beloved community look like? What would you hope for would happen between All Saints and St. Barnabas, and then maybe even a little bit more broadly? But from each of your perspectives, what should we be? What are we aiming for? What do we want to accomplish? What would be the ideal situation or the ideal outcome for each of you? So, Stephen.
I'll keep this brief, but this has come out of a conversation with Marco as we go along with these, and let me be first to say is that you have to talk, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be willing to take on whatever that is to build a relationship. And relationships don't happen instantaneously. You have to be committed to those relationships. I think in the particular case, in terms of our working towards reconciliation, is our hope from the long term was that this would stand as an example for all those other places and institutions, whether they be in the church or not, to do the same thing. That the work that we are doing can be a framework or an example to say, you know what, we've had this on the table for our 50 or 100 years and haven't done anything about it. And here is an institution, two institutions in Pasadena that are confronting this. However difficult, however uncomfortable it is, they're doing it anyway. And we should be doing the same thing.
Thank you, Stephen. Walter, any closing thoughts, remarks?
Yeah, I mean, from long-term or dream perspective, if you will, what motivates me here is that I'd like to be in a situation where some of the things that Brunel and others have shared with me about experiences that they've had at All Saints and things that have been said to them no longer happen. No, not because we shut it down, not because we made it so that the people didn't share it, but because people no longer felt it. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And because that's my dream.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, our lessons here, we're definitely not in a post-racial society. I think that, we really need to make something significant happen here. I would look to all of the people on this call as comrades, and I'm hoping you all can think of things that you can do to improve this situation. I know it's our situation at All Saints and our situation, and along with St. Barnabas, but I also feel like we need comrades in this sort of fight to sort of unearth some of these things. So I'm hoping that folks are not just sort of silent observers, but can actually help us with those action steps. And I'm really hoping that we can deal with the compound interest and, you know, develop some concrete steps to sort of begin to repair the situation. I don't think whatever we do is going to repair the situation, but I think that we need to, attempt to do some repair of the situation, and it has to be earnest and meaningful action. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and one way I like to think of that repair is to heal. So think about how we might heal from the trauma. Marco?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that process of healing that Brother Bill spoke of. I've been involved with professional sports in my day and personal training, and I can remember a personal trainer suggesting that when you want to lose significant weight, you should lose the weight at the same rate in which you gained it to ensure that it's a change of lifestyle.
Yes, yes.
So Brother Bill is the first to underscore the notion that the repair, or what Brian refers to as healing, should now take 101 years. So the dedication and the commitment to establishing a healthy relationship, a love-based relationship, because that's what the Bible commands us to do. A love-based relationship is something that has to grow over time. And it's not going to be encompassed by an apology letter or a wonderful hour and a half webinar on a Friday in June, right? But it has to be a way of life for all of us. And so the reason that I say all of us is because someone, maybe Brother Brian can help me with who coined this quote. I'm being facetious, but he said that at the end of the day, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So Sharon, Lucinda, Sally, Emily, Selena, Donna, Sarah, Emily, all of you, are you going to be silent friends? Or are you going to be vocal allies and active allies in this challenge that we have in Pasadena today?
So I want to close by thanking Dick and the Pasadena Village and the 1619 Project for this amazing opportunity. And I want to thank all of our panelists for their compassion, their commitment, their brilliance, and their desire to make this a better world, starting in our own backyard. This has been a rich conversation, and I agree with Marco. I hope that it catalyzes everyone to take action. Walter, would you like to take us out?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, as each of us are exploring, our proximity to racial justice and wanting to learn more about how we feel the way that each of us feels the way they do, where it came from, and how to unpack that. There are spaces in the greater Los Angeles area where white people in particular can unpack that without putting that burden on people of color. One example is called Aware LA. If that's something to be helpful for you all to be in dialogue with others on the journey, I would commend you to utilize those resources.
It looked like, Brian, that Dick had his hand up.
Yeah,
I like it.
I have to pitch it to Dick anyway because he's our host. So Dick, please close us out. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. This is, as you said earlier, this is a very rich conversation. I very much have the feeling that we need to continue this, and I'll be in touch with you about that. I do want to say this is a Pasadena Village event, and we have our values statement and our strategic plan up on our website. Both of them feature diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And this 1619 project is one of the steps that we take, one of our efforts that we make to do something about this is to carry on the discussions. And I'll just say one other thing about the weight comment. I have some experience with that, and my experience has been that weight goes on a lot faster and easier than it comes off.
Amen.
So, with that, I thank you all, and I would like to personally invite each and every one of you to look at our website and consider that we are an organization that is trying in our way to do something about this, and we invite you to join us. So we'd love to have you as villagers. So thank you very much. This will conclude our session for today. We will get this up on our YouTube channel as soon as possible, and it will be mentioned in our blog post on the website, so you can follow that sometime in the middle of next week and take a look at it and go back and review this conversation and promote it to your friends. People can watch this on YouTube. I think this is a wonderful conversation, and I thank everyone who participated. So thank you, and stay well.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Thank you, Dick.
We hope to see you all back.